You're listening to Always Player One, a solo board gaming podcast.
Hello and welcome to Always Player One. I'm Scruffy.
And I'm Norm, and today we're going to be talking about One Deck Dungeon. Today we're going to be talking about both One Deck Dungeon and One Deck Dungeon Forest of Shadows. Sort of format of the episode, or the way we prepared for it anyway, is Scruffy had already played One Deck Dungeon prior to us doing it for the show. So I've been playing One Deck Dungeon, and Scruffy's kept the copy of Forest of Shadows. And I've been playing through one, he's been playing through the other. We're going to be talking about both, and I'm going to be learning all about Forest of Shadows at the same time you guys are. So I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, and a massive thank you to Banana Republic, who provided us both with the two copies that we've played. They are one of our
listeners, Discord users, patrons, friends, lovely person.
Long-term awesome supporters of the show. And yeah, can't thank you enough, Banana. This has been a real treat for both of us, and I'm looking forward to unpacking it in the episode.
Okay, so before we dive in, should we tell everyone a little bit about what One Deck Dungeon is all about?
Okay, so for anyone who hasn't seen the game before, One Deck Dungeon is a soloable dungeon dive where you take on the role of an adventurer seeking to descend the depths and eventually fight a boss. At the start of the game, you choose your hero, each offering different skills, heroic feats, and stats, and you choose a dungeon with different difficulty levels. There is one deck of dungeon cards which makes up every enemy and trap you will meet in the game, and a bunch of d6 dice in different colours to represent the 3 stats and 1 wild colour. Every turn you will discard 2 cards from the dungeon deck before taking an action. Once the deck is depleted, you will descend to the next level of the dungeon, shuffling the discard pile to make a new dungeon deck. You also slide the level card up to increase the passive difficulty of every encounter. On your turn, you will either be exploring or entering a room. Exploring sees you place cards from the dungeon deck face down on the table, so there are 4 cards in total in front of you. Entering a room allows you to take any card in front of you and encounter it. Once revealed, you can choose to either flee from the encounter, usually if you flipped something horrible, returning it back to the table face up, or you can deal with the encounter. Encounters always resolve the same way, with you activating any heroic feats on your hero card, then rolling dice equal to your hero's relevant stats, and finally placing them in an attempt to cover up the encountered enemy or trap cards boxes, as well as the boxes on the level card. Any boxes left uncovered after all your dice are placed will deal the depicted consequences to your hero, usually in the form of wounds or time loss, or poison in the Forest of Shadow expansion. Time loss simply means discarding more cards from the dungeon deck, forcing you through the game faster, and meaning you will get to the end boss with less time to prepare, while wounds can lead to a loss if they exceed your hero's health. After completing an encounter, regardless of the consequences, you will always take its reward to either increase your stats, give you new skills to play with, or take you closer to leveling up. Once you have descended 3 levels of the dungeon, you will meet the boss for that dungeon and have a final showdown or fight to the death. And that is One Deck Dungeon in a nutshell.
That is One Deck Dungeon in a nutshell. Good job as always, Scruffy.
Thank you, Norm.
Can I start with just saying, this game is essentially kick the door down, beat up the bad guy, take the loot, rinse and repeat, right?
It certainly is, yeah.
That is, when I first got into the hobby, how someone pitched Munchkin to me and made me play Munchkin. How I wish I played this game instead, because this is a really, really cool game.
I feel like there's something about this game that, yeah, I'm with you 100%. I wish it had been a game I'd encountered right at the start of my kind of board gaming experience, because it feels nostalgic, even though I only played it quite far into having played board games, not necessarily solo board games. I played the digital version of this quite a while ago, but it was at a point where I'd learned quite a few board games, and I just think it's so light and chill and so easily accessible that I think this is a game that is so new player friendly, right?
Yes, it is. But one thing I didn't expect is it's because I've heard that, I've heard it's a dice chucker, it's a game where with a lot of random elements. I didn't expect it to be so satisfying as well.
Mm.
I feel like you have a lot of choice and agency over what you do with your dice.
Hmm.
With very little rules overhead, and the balance it manages to strike is wonderful, and it's something I really hope we get to unpack throughout the episode.
Yeah, it's very puzzly, isn't it? Like, so you roll the dice for your combat or your trap card, whatever you're facing, and then you look at those numbers and you start trying to fill in these boxes in front of you, and you're trying to cover all the boxes, but you've rolled and you haven't got quite enough to do those boxes. So you look down at your character and you look at their skills and you try and work out how you can get the most value out of what you've just rolled. Well, if I place a two mana, two blue dice on this skill, that will mean I can roll a different blue dice and add two to it. So that's going to increase a blue dice for me. Okay, I'll do that first, and then I'll see where I am. And it's that sort of thing. But you just kind of each encounter, it's kind of a conversation almost between you, your dice, your skills, and trying to get those boxes filled in.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I rolled something in the game and I thought, because as well as it giving you agency, it also gives you restrictions, which is what adds to the puzzly element. And one of the restrictions I really, really like, because it's so frustrating, is the boxes with the shield on them.
Right.
The shield boxes always need to be filled in first. And I can't tell you how many times I've rolled my dice. I've gone, oh well, I need a 6 yellow for the shield. And I haven't got any. Well, that's the one I need to fill in first, so I'm doomed. Hold on a second. Let me just hold on. If I use this skill and then discard these 2 dice to turn it into a black, then I can actually, and then that creates a future problem for future you, and you have to work that one out as well. And eventually you go, hold on, I can do this whole thing. I only take 1 wound. Oh, but I got a purple die left over, and that means I can spend it on this skill to negate that wound. Oh, brilliant! How
Yeah.
did I do that? I thought it was game over a second ago.
Yeah, when you roll the dice and you look at them and they're not telling you they don't immediately give you the answer. They don't, I mean, unless you're very lucky, they don't immediately say, "Yep, just put us all on the thing, match the numbers." You're often sat there with not quite a perfect situation. You haven't got enough whatever yellow dice, or you haven't got the right numbers on the yellow dice. So you are then forced to get creative and start manipulating, start making sacrifices here and there. Well, maybe if I take that pink 6 that would cover that 2 time loss, I can turn it into the yellow I need to stop me taking wounds, for example. And that sort of prioritization that is coming from you, the player, is really kind of fun and it makes you feel quite clever, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it's worth probably unpacking how the game gives you agency because,
Mm.
as you said in your description, you roll the dice and then you choose how to allocate them. So, what levers does the game give you to control the dice after you've rolled them? I think that's really where the game shines for me.
Yeah.
So, I want to unpack a few of those, and I'd like for you to add in any that I will inevitably forget, if that's okay.
Okay. Okay.
So, one that I thought was really, really smart is there's this wild dice. The black dice are wild; they can be any color.
They're called the hero dice, right?
Yes. Now, with these hero dice, you might not have any when you rolled them, but you can acquire them with the dice you already have. What you do is you take 2 dice of any color and you can just discard them. And whatever the lowest value was on one of those 2 dice, you will get that back in a black die. Meaning, if you haven't got the color you need to fill in what you have, you can. It's obviously poor value, but sometimes it's just what you need. And I think that is so smart because it will inevitably make the rest of the card harder for you because you're working with less dice. But it will fill in the restrictive elements, the requirements, the shield icons for you, or it will give you the last box that you need. So I like the way it solves one problem and yet creates another, whilst giving you agency over how you want to solve that. And it's such a simple rule that's such a simple rule to understand. Take 2 dice, remove them, and get the lowest value back as a black die. But the gameplay implications there are they're not, I don't want to over exaggerate, they're not huge, it's not groundbreaking, but it's really, really fun.
Yeah, it is really fun and it makes matches really exciting as well. And I think that's really important when you think about a game that is at its core a dice chucker game where you roll loads of dice, how you feel when you see those dice should match the mechanical value that those dice give you. And a lot of people would, I think, be put off in One Deck Dungeon by the randomness. That success or failure can be dependent on the dice rolls. But certainly when you look at things like this mechanic, where if you see matching numbers in the dice, there's something, even Monopoly gets this, that there's something important there to you as a player, I think. I think we just have an innate want for that pattern recognition. And when you see that and you go, oh, we've got 2 threes, I could turn those into a wild 3. That just seems so sensible with those heroic dice. I called them hero dice. I've just realized they're heroic dice. And so those heroic dice, I think, really fit that kind of, I don't know what the word for it is, but that sort of, I want to call it satisfying wish fulfillment. I can't think of the right word to say here.
I can't either,
That
Scruffy.
you see something and it immediately leaps out at you. And I think it's really important game design to factor that in when you're working stuff out.
Especially when you're working with dice.
Yes.
Because that's the fun, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And here we have, it's worth saying right off the bat here, we have a game that has lots of dice, and you roll those dice and you roll them lots and you re-roll them. And, there's something really gratifying about that from, having, I'm sure all of us and a lot of you listening will have played so many, deep and stodgy, thinky games where you're not allowed to roll the dice.
Mm.
How
Yes.
fun is it? How refreshing is it to just pick up this little box of fun and start rolling those dice?
A little box of fun, put that on the box.
And the great thing as well is you unlock more dice as you play. So the handfuls get bigger until you're finally fighting the end boss and you are just picking up. And I've been smiling to myself while I've been playing it, just rattling a massive handful of dice and throwing them down. It feels impactful. It feels powerful. And it starts to get more kind of, you start to understand and intuit a bit more what's going to come up, what you're going to do with all those low dice, which skills you take them to, which skills you activate first, because that gives you the best information. It's wicked.
So that's where I was hoping to go next. So after the heroic dice, the next way in which this game gives you agency is with the skills, I think. And I'm talking about agency post-roll, because I think that's what's important, right?
Yeah.
That's where this game sings.
Yeah, there's basically no agency pre-roll. You have 4 face-down cards in front of you usually, or something like that, and you just pick a card to encounter. It's not like you have an idea of what that card might be. You can't peek at them. You might have an encounter that you ran away from earlier, so you can either face that now if you think you're ready, or take a mystery card. But that's about the agency you get in pre-roll, isn't it?
Yeah, so the agency you have post-roll is the next way in which it enables you to make decisions is the skills. So one of the things you can choose to do when you kill an enemy or defeat an encounter, so that be a trap or an enemy, is they will have rewards on them. The rewards will either be an item, a skill, or a potion, or you can just take them for XP. Now, the skills go underneath your character card, and they're like extra ways to spend the dice that you roll. You can, like, say, for example, sacrifice a yellow, and that means you get to roll 2 more purples. So that means sacrificing one of your fighting dice to get to roll 2 agility dice, for example. And by the time you get to the end, knowing what order to play them in, especially in the boss fights and the later dungeon scenarios, is so important and so much fun. And the fun before that, before you have all of those options to you, is knowing which ones to pick. Because there's something lovely about going, well, I'm playing the warrior, so I have lots of yellow fighty dice. I'm going to take this early skill that lets me spend one of them to get 3 mana rolls or an automatic success on agility, because I don't have that skill. I'm not as good with that kind of thing at the moment. It's really fun to build your character, and it's elegant in its design as well, in that you kill the enemy, you slide it underneath, and then later on it's going to provide you extra agency in the game. I love that. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, that's a wicked choice as well, isn't it? When you deal with an encounter card and you look at it and you can do one of 3 things with it. You can either slide it under as a skill or potion if it's a potion, slide it to the side as a stat, or slide it under the level up card for experience to try and level up. It's a nice little choice, and it's important to say that you have a number of slots based on your level. So you only are allowed to have, like, I think it's 2 skills at the start and 1 item, which is the stats. And then as you level up, you get more slots, but you can replace one if you want to. So if you decide, actually I prefer this skill to this skill, that's fine. You slot the new skill under, replace the old one if you're full on slots, and put that old one as experience. So it gives you that freedom of choice and flexibility there. It allows you to build your character how you want to. It doesn't restrict you and say, no, 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 you took too many skills early, you can't replace them now. It accounts for that randomness of not encountering the skill you want early by allowing you to take a weaker skill or a skill you're not as interested in, but then replace it when you find a good one, which I think is really neat.
And that one that you just replaced will give you XP and help you level up. There's no waste. All
Yeah.
the loot is valuable.
Yeah, and oh my god, there's so much more to unpack with this. Just the thing that springs immediately to mind is that an interesting factor about all this that you may not have noticed, having not if you haven't played, is that this is taking cards out of the deck. So these cards are going under your hero for their item, for their skill, or even as experience. Once you spend that experience, they go from the game. So they thin the deck down ever so slightly, meaning that each subsequent floor from the first gets a little bit quicker, a little bit less opportunity to encounter enemies and cards, and ramps up the speed at which you get to the final boss. So as your character levels up, you are removing time from the deck, which is, I think, really interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things about that is the way it helps sort of push the arc of the game to be in a satisfying direction.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll be honest, the first time I played, once I got through the second floor and I got into the third and final, I thought, I didn't think the game was going to be this long. But
Yes,
then,
yeah.
10 minutes later, I was done.
Yeah, and it does feel like that because you're doing the same action of shuffling the deck. If you haven't played very much, it can feel like, and to some extent, the game might be a little bit longer than you expect it to be because it's such a small game, small box, that with one deck, you expect it to be quite quick. And especially when you're learning the game, it can feel like it outstays its welcome a little bit. But as you get more and more experience, you start to realize, no, it's going to speed up a little bit. And once you get past that second floor, there's not long left now. You will be seeing that boss soon. And I think that sort of expectation changes the more you play.
Yeah, I agree. That's exactly what I found as well. And I was really grateful for that. I thought
Yeah.
it means that when you're at your weakest, you're given your most opportunity to level up and
Hmm.
to grab items and potions and skills and XP.
And it also invites you to be a bit more frivolous with, oh, I'll take a time loss here. That's not a big deal. I'll lose 1 or 2 cards from the dungeon deck here or there. It's only the first level. We've got ages, which I think is nice. That it invites that sort of lazy play and then kind of punishes you for it subtly without you really expecting it to happen.
Yeah. That's interesting. Very Robinson Crusoe. The way you go. Well, we can put that in the adventure deck. That's not going to come back and bite us.
Yeah,
Then
good
it
point.
does.
I mean, it's true even of wounds. Like, wounds are nothing. They don't matter. You'll heal them at some point, sure, probably down the line, until you realise that actually there are no opportunities to heal now, and I'm right at the end with only with 3 wounds on my character. How did this happen? I was expecting to heal those.
Yeah, exactly. I noticed that as well. I got to the final boss fight, and I thought I've only taken 3 damage. Let's look at this boss then. Oh, if I leave one of their boxes open, it does 4 damage. That's me dead.
Yeah, but this is part of the joy of it, I think, and it's really important that it's like this because when you inevitably have an encounter that you can't cover all the box off because you rolled absolute garbage that turn, then you need to be okay with taking those wounds and not feel like throwing your toys out of the pram and restarting, right? You need to be able to. I think it's important that you don't know whether you're going to end up with those wounds when you encounter the boss, that you don't know how long they'll linger because you might heal them with a potion at some point. They might not be a big issue for now. You don't know what's going to come, what's going to happen, right? And I think it's important that that mystery is there.
Yeah, for sure. I agree entirely. I like the level of uncertainty that isn't just turn by turn, but over the whole over the whole course of the game. I think
Yeah.
it's yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of compounded and made even more clear with the way that time loss happens. Because I tend to find that those are the boxes that get left. An odd time loss here, a couple of time loss there. That's fine. I'll just leave those ones open. I filled in most of the boxes, and I might as well do that rather than take a wound. But so these kind of minor consequences, I think it's really cool the way they kind of don't feel bad. They feel fine. They feel relaxing to encounter as a player, I think. Like, well, at least it's just a time loss, not a wound. That's okay. Oh, it was just one wound. It could have been worse. I could have had a wound and a poison counter if you're playing Forest of the Shadows. I managed to avoid that by covering that box cleverly. So even when you don't quite succeed as well as you could or have a flawless success, you still feel good about it because it wasn't as bad as it could have been.
And I think that's a really interesting piece of design that we sort of almost overlooked entirely there when we were describing the game. I think the fundamental idea of whenever you're done, you will always get the loot. You will always win the encounter.
Yeah.
Unless you die, you will always win the encounter.
Yeah, for sure.
And you think, oh, well, where's the tension? Well, the tension is how well do you win it? Because sometimes, you're left with like 3 boxes of consequences to deal with, and you think, this isn't a win.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm glad I've got the 4 XP and that's going to level me up. But you know what? I could have really just done with rolling a lot better that time.
But you don't feel bad. And I think this is what the heart of this game for me is. It is a masterclass in how to make players not feel bad about losing. And we'll get onto this even more in a minute. But you're absolutely right there that moment where you have a horrible roll or you have an encounter that just goes terribly and you have that thought of, if only I'd rolled better, I wish I'd just rolled better. You don't feel responsible for the loss there. You feel like you did everything you could to mitigate it as much as you could with that roll. And, even if you're wrong, you don't know you're wrong because you didn't notice.
That's true. That's true. You think I've looked at all the options and I've done this the best way possible. But that may or may not be true, but there's no way of knowing that because the only person there to assess how well you're doing is yourself.
Yeah, and you've got a really great scapegoat. You can blame the dice. Well, I rolled 2 ones, so there was no way I was ever going to be able to do this. And that might be true. It might have been impossible. When you encounter a card or an enemy, when you roll, it might be that your roll means you can't cover the boxes. You might not be able to cover, you'll probably be able to cover some boxes statistically, unless you rolled literally all ones. But yeah, that could happen. But it could be that it was impossible to do better than you did, even though you're taking this massive hit. So as a player, you don't feel bad.
And on top of that, once you've processed all those feelings, you then, you do get the 4 XP and you do level up. And that does give you an extra heroic die and a new potion that you can use on your now plethora of potion options that you've gained throughout your previous encounters. And that means you're going to breeze past the next one, and that's fine. So those sort of, like you said, Scruffy, you do have a scapegoat in the dice and you don't feel bad about it because you feel like you've done the best you can. That's because you have those lovely options of agency post-roll that I was talking about. And on top of that, you're then rewarded, no matter how badly you've done.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the luck mitigation and the way the potions work a little bit more in a moment. But this works on a meta level too. That thing you're saying about getting the rewards for even if you fail, even if it doesn't work out. If you're playing the campaign mode, this happens on the grand scale of the game as well. So I'd love to just turn our attention to how the campaign works now.
I'm really excited to talk about this because when you said that it was a campaign mode, I kind of rolled my eyes a bit because every game has a campaign mode now. Like, it's the trendy thing, Having a campaign mode is like having a blonde mohawk in the UK when David Beckham was at his power. That's how trendy campaign modes are at the moment. And I kind of roll my eyes like, why is there a campaign mode? It's just a little small card game. It doesn't need one. But it doesn't work like a normal campaign. You don't have to play it through. There isn't an overarching story. What there is instead is this lovely score sheet where
Mm.
you just tick a box for every floor you've completed, every time you've leveled up, and 3 boxes for if you defeat the boss. And you can fill in green ones if you've done an easy boss, yellow ones if you've done a medium boss, or red ones if you've done a difficult boss. And once you complete a whole row, you get a new ability, which means your character gets to start the next game a little bit better. So there's some really fun options there of, do I just go for the harder one? Or do I sort of farm the easy one? Do I grind for a bit and get my character ready? Because I failed my first one. I got to the boss fight. I got to boss down to 1 health remaining, and I rolled terrible. And I took my last 2 wounds. I took 4 hits. I could only negate 2 of them with my skills, and I died. And I thought, I'm not moving on to the next one yet. I ticked up all my boxes. I got the veteran ability, which meant I started the game with a new skill. And I went again. Actually died quicker the next time, but
Yes, but this is the thing. So this is basically, instead of a campaign mode, I think of it as a score sheet that gives you stuff. Depending on how well you do, you get more stuff. But if you were to lose really early on, as I did in one of my games, it doesn't feel bad because the time investment that you put into it, you get rewarded appropriately for that time investment. I did 2 floors, that's 2 ticks. I leveled up twice, that's 2 more ticks, that's 4 ticks. If you do the whole thing, you can get up to 9 ticks. Whoa! And you feel like you earned those 9 ticks, especially to defeat the boss being worth that big spike of free ticks. It feels like you earned it. But what I'm getting at here is that the reward happens even if you lose. It's just proportional to how well you did and how much time you invested. And that feels so right. That feels so good. How often is it that in board games, even our favorite board games like Mage Knight, for example, you get to the end and it's just a binary win-loss condition. You did it or you didn't do it. Either way, you still spent the same amount of time playing the game. So it kind of feels worse to have lost because you still spent all that time playing the game. You don't get knocked out any earlier.
or even worse, in Too Many Bones, when you lose, you actually spend longer playing the game.
Oh my god, yeah, great example. Yeah, because you don't challenge the tyrant, do you?
And you don't get this isn't a Too Many Bones episode, but you don't get the progress, so you have to play longer to get more progress.
Yes. The game that it made me think this stood out most for is Gloomhaven. So in Gloomhaven, you can get to the last room, the last single enemy left, and lose, and then you get nothing for it. You just have to try it again. You might get some experience for your character or some cash, but not very much. And certainly comparatively to completing it and being able to then move on and progress the story, you don't get the reward that you were seeking from the game. When you play this, if you're interested in the reward from the game, you will get the reward you're seeking, just not as much of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the difference there is that because Gloomhaven, like you said, you will still get loot, you will still get XP. The difference there is that's not really what you're playing Gloomhaven for. You're playing Gloomhaven to progress the story and to explore the world. So when you get stuck, regardless of the loot you get, it feels bad. This game knows what you want from it. This game knows you want those ticks, so you can come and play again and be better.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you them regardless of what you do, and it gives you them proportionately as well.
Yeah,
it doesn't get in its own way at all. It knows what parts of the game are fun, and it allows you to access them constantly. And I think that's so easy to, because games need to be challenging, they need to have wrinkles in them, and a lot of wrinkles that designers add in sometimes can actually prevent you from accessing the fun part of the game. Mr. Turn is a really good example. There's nothing even close to that in One Deck Dungeon. It's all action all the time. You're the star, and you're going to have a good time.
Yeah. And even if you lose or get knocked back, get defeated, even if you lose the whole game, there's still something for you there. Like, even if you weren't playing with this score sheet, the story that you get from the game is still interesting and it's still fun. It's still a fun experience to have, even if you get wiped out early. And you know what? Losing makes you just want to do it even more. Like, try that boss again. I find, anyway.
Yeah, I strongly agree. I don't know why anyone wouldn't play with a score sheet. It's such
Mm.
an easy thing to keep track of.
Yeah, it really is simple, isn't it?
It's so simple. You just finish your game and you, how well did I do? Tick tick tick, and it's not like counting points. It's just I did 3 level ups and 3 floors, 6 ticks, done.
Yeah. And I do like that defeating the boss in itself is 3 ticks. It does give a sense of stakes to the thing, and it does make it really exciting if you do get to the boss fight. Because I mean, it is a challenge to get to the boss fight in a lot of them, especially if you're trying to punch above your weight and do a difficult dungeon, or not grind a dungeon, as you were saying earlier. It's not something I've done. I've always been trying to strive for the next big dungeon, play at a level that I find difficult. So it is exciting when you get to the boss fight, but it's even more exciting because that's 3 ticks right there. It kind of hooks you. But those 3 ticks, it's not that long an investment of time. It's not like doing 3 whole steps of the dungeon. You're fighting one encounter, maybe 2-3 turns on it max, right? And then that fight is over. It's not an entire cycle of the deck 3 times for those 3 ticks. So what that means is, win or lose, you've invested the same amount of time.
So can we talk about how the boss fights work? Because I think they're quite
Yes.
interesting.
Yes. The way the boss fights work, it is very much you are locked in to a combat encounter. And there are 2 types of encounters in the game: traps and combat. This is just one big combat encounter where every turn you roll all your dice and then you start assigning them to the boxes. And every boss has a different ability and they're all unique in their own special way. But usually, what you're trying to do is cover up the nasty boxes that are going to do damage to you, as well as the skull icons on the boxes. And for every one of those that you cover up, you will do 1 damage to the boss. And you have to try and take out their hit points, which is obviously very different to the other encounters in the game, where you will win regardless of how many boxes you cover up. With the boss fights, you have to cover up boxes to hurt them.
What's interesting is the game knows you want to cover those skull boxes because that's how you defeat the boss. But the game will give you really difficult choices to make about how to spend your dice because
Mhm.
the other boxes that won't do damage to the boss, they will be the ones that hurt you the most. You know, you think, okay, most characters have around sort of 6 health, 5 health, 6 health, something like that. And there are boxes that will just straight up do 4 damage if you don't fill them in. And that you will have to chuck a lot of dice in those boxes in order to fill them in. So you think to yourself, right, all I got to do is, 5 damage to the boss, easy peasy, 6 damage to the boss, whatever, I can do that. And then you roll and think, if I don't put all my dice into that horrible sinkhole of dice, I'm going to get 4 damage. And that means I've got like maybe one more turn left to do it. And you've got a real choice to make of, especially if you have the luxury of, well, if 4 dice won't kill you, which is I found unusual. If you get to the boss fight and 4 hits won't kill you, but it has happened where I've got to the boss fight and I can take 4 damage. I can take it. What a luxury that is! But now I'm walking a very very thin tightrope because now I absolutely cannot take any more damage. And I think the way the game makes you make those difficult decisions, and again, in what is essentially just rolling dice and placing them on a card, it's really fun.
Yeah, and it's very cinematic as well, isn't it? That you have this real locked in fight. And usually, I can't remember how they are for the base game, but certainly for the Forest of the Shadows, all the bosses have an enrage timer, which is to say, every turn they will do something that's going to make it so that if you just keep filling in all their damage boxes and not hurting them back, things are going to get worse. The game's going to end in a loss for some reason, for one reason or another. So, for example, there's one that the first one in this Forest of Shadows that exiles dice at the start of every turn. It will just remove dice from the game, from your general supply, which means that those are no longer available to you. And if it starts getting to the point where your bank of dice is gone, you start not being able to roll all your dice on your stats, and you're going to lose. Eventually, you'll run out of dice to roll against it, and it's going to eat you. Right? I think that's the case for most, if not all, the bosses in the game. Is that true for the base game as well?
I don't think so.
Is it not? Maybe that's an addition to the Forest of Shadows. I think the Phoenix boss didn't have that as well. But certainly, I just fought a Scorpion today that had it exiled poison counters. I think that's a lovely design when they do include that in the bosses.
And yeah, they have all the effects are pretty devastating though. There's the Yeti in the base game, for example, and they have a really basic effect of all ones you roll are discarded. Well, the first time I encountered this, I looked at the Yeti and I thought, well, ones won't fill in anything for the Yeti, so that doesn't matter. But then when you discard 4 of your dice, you realize I need those dice to activate my skills. I'm relying on those bad rolls so that I can unlock my skills to get more dice or to fill in more things or get some more automatic successes. I wanted those ones. I wanted, 4 ones so I could activate all 4 of my skills. That's so frustrating. I love how they're deceptively punishing.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, that's almost an enraged timer on that one, where at some point, if you keep just treading water with that boss, you're going to roll a load of ones, and you will lose all your dice, and it will hit you. Whatever those skills you've been relying on, yeah, it's going to hit you. So I see
I
that as a
mean, it's
similar.
exactly what happened in several of my plays. In several of my plays, I've steadily ticked up the boss, and then on like the third roll, everything's just gone terribly, and I can't. There was one really, really good play, and it sticks out of memory. I was using a blue 6 every turn to activate a really powerful effect, which let me change the value of 5 different dice.
Wow.
And that was super powerful. It was a lot of XP that I could have cashed it in for, but I used it as a skill, and it was saving my behind in the boss fight. And then one turn I didn't roll a blue 6, and I went, "Well, I'm dead." And I was staring at my skills and my potions, which were all depleted, and just trying to figure out, is there nothing smart I can do? I've been playing so well all game. They've only got 1 hit point left. No, that's it. You didn't roll your 6. You should have had a backup plan.
And how did you feel after that?
I played again immediately after.
That's what I mean. The loss in this game feels good. It feels like it's baked into the design, right? This game is as fun to lose as it is to win, and that's incredible.
Yeah. It's just a lot of fun to play.
Yes. There's a few things we haven't really touched on yet. So I wanted to talk about the difference between traps and combat. And before that, maybe I think we should maybe talk about the different types of boxes in the game. That you have big boxes and small boxes.
Yes, let's really break down how the encounters work. I think that would be fun.
Because I think it's fun to talk about with this game, and we don't usually go quite this mechanics heavy in a game, but I really like it in One Deck Dungeon, and I think I like the subtle reasons that the things are there as well. I like the way that just with a small tweak, it's like it just twists ever so slightly one way or the other. It feels different, and that's a really, really exciting design choice. It's really neat and it's really clever. So the way the boxes work is you either have small boxes or big boxes, and it's simply small boxes can only have 1 dice in them, and big boxes you can put as many dice as you want in them. Big boxes are usually bigger numbers. So if there was a small box with the number 5 in it, you'd have to put a 5 or a 6 in it, right? Simple as that. If there was a big box with a number 10 in it, you could put 2 5s or a 6 and a 4 or 5 1s and a 5, however you want to do it. And obviously the boxes are all colored to match a specific skill, which probably should have said that right up top of the episode, but hey, always player 1 being as efficient as ever. But yeah, so the reason I think this is really cool is that it means that when you look at your dice, you can immediately see different ways of doing things. Maybe I'll put the 5 in that small box there, and I'll put the 6 and the 4 in the big box. That would be great. Oh, but what about that 6 box over there, the small 6 box? That has to have a 6 in it, right? So maybe I need to get the lower numbers in the big box. And you see, it makes for a really interesting consideration of where to put the big dice, what to do with the little dice.
And then when you think you have it worked out, you realize that one of the boxes you're missing has a shield on it and needs to be filled in in order for you to continue. And
Yes.
you have to plan everything all over again.
Yeah, and it's really fun that each enemy is kind of different and unique in that the way you look at their boxes is different. The way that their boxes are laid out is different. Those little changes mean you have to fight them in a very different way. You know, if their big box has a shield, well, then you can immediately throw all your little dice at that. That's good value. And then you can save your big dice for later. But if the little box is, if there's loads of little boxes that are shields, then you're going to have to start looking for those numbers. And that's really cool because I don't know about you, Norm, but whenever I see the little boxes, I always try and match up the exact number for maximum value, right?
Of course, right? It's the Eurogamers in us.
It feels really wrong to put a 6 dice on a 5 box. Because, well, what if I needed that 6 for one extra point in a big box later? Yeah, so it's a lot of fun.
I like the way the game also confronts that feeling and makes you. The game has a 5 with a shield on it, and the only thing in that color that is a 5 or above is a 6, and you're sat there going, I don't want to do that.
This is the puzzly nature of the game, you know, in its essence, isn't it? And it's having that thing in the back of your mind as well of, well, I could always trade down this 3 and a 2 for a wild 2, and that also makes you lose that one value, doesn't it? You know, you're always kind of having to work out, oh, but I don't want to lose one value from my dice. I want them to be their full value.
And it's not just losing the value, it's losing the dice, because the dice could be used, if it's not a very good dice, just to activate a skill if you've got an appropriate skill. So it's kind of a double loss for an immediate win, but sometimes that immediate win is exactly what you need.
Yes, and sometimes those